So it's been a little over a week since Boreas was added. Most people have probably gotten to play around with Boreas. We've gotten to see what it can do, what it's good at, what it's bad at, and because of that, I've come to a couple conclusions about this race. First of all, the race really doesn't make any sense because it's not what it was sort of advertised as. Dusky said that it was a sort of defense-oriented race, but its skills don't really suggest that. The second conclusion I've come to is Boreas is just really bad. Really, really bad. And I don't mean stats-wise. I mean it's ridiculous. We all know about the passive damage buff and whatever. So we'll get to that later. But just keep that in mind. That Boreas isn't really as good as people. It's not as good as people think it is. So first of all, Boreas is not defense oriented. This is not a defense race. When it was sort of first hinted at or whatever, it was said that Boreas was a defense oriented race. It was focused on self-preservation and whatnot. That was pretty cool. I thought that was going to be cool. And Dusky even said that its skills would scale with Arcane and Endurance, which alone would have made it unique among the other races because none of the other ones have Endurance scaling on any of their skills. That alone, just the Endurance scaling, would make it unique. That'd make it kind of interesting, kind of different. But then, the update rolls around. Boreas gets dropped. 2 days later, Dusky says he forgot the Strength Arcane scaling. It has no scaling except for the passive. Wait a minute. Strength and Arcane. What happened to Endurance? And then on the 19th, he says he fixed the Boreas scaling / Endurance. My bad. He works for Arcane / Strength now. Fixed, you say. What do you mean, fixed? Are you hinting that the Endurance scaling was a bug? That it wasn't intended, even though that's what you said it was going to be earlier? If you look at the Trello, if you look at the scaling on the Trello, you can see right here, scaling, Strength divided by 60, Arcane divided by 60. Okay, what about Inner Frost? Oh, Strength divided by 60, Arcane divided by 60. The Endurance scaling is just gone. It's just typical Strength Arcane now. So already, off to a bad start, because that one defense-oriented trait is now gone in favor of the typical DPS trait scaling, which we already have plenty of, and I feel like we don't really need more of. On top of the Endurance scaling being gone, initial leaking showed that Inner Frost would have a 50% true damage reduction. But now that's gone. That damage reduction is just gone. It's just the heavy stun and the AoE. So alongside those two things being gone, there is nothing else defense-oriented about Boreas. Both of its active skills are just AoE DPS skills. I'd imagine that a race that was supposed to be a defense race would do something, at least have one skill that is designed to help you defend yourself. Currently, it has one thing I would consider defense-orientated. Everything else is just typical DPS stuff. I would not really consider this race a defense race. It's just a DPS race that has high damage reduction. So on to issue number 2. Boreas is just super fucking strong. Ridiculously strong. If it didn't have its, its passive damage buff, then this race would be, I would consider, on paper, passable. I mean, it already has a 1 energy, pretty high damage AoE skill, it lets you clear encounters pretty easily, and the passive chance to apply cold on hits, it has decent synergy with Ice Round weapons and the Frost Enchant, which neither of those two things are currently meta. They're still strong, so having the passive cold proc on a race just sort of incentivizes people to use that, which I think is good. I kind of want the meta to lean away from the standard Inferno Dragonbone Cursed Blight Rock combo, because that's all people use. The biggest issue with this race is its first passive, and I'll read that for you right here. When Boreas users use any ice affinity move, they increase their damage by 20% with a max cap of 200%. So using any ice skill will give you 20% more damage. And if we keep reading here, while this passive is active, it also provides a 10% damage reduction per every 20% damage buff. So basically what that means is every time you use an ice move, you gain a 20% damage reduction, you gain a 20% damage buff and a 10% damage reduction every time you use an ice move. This is a permanent, incredibly easy to reach 200% damage buff on any attack, alongside an absolutely gargantuan 70% damage reduction that you can get just as easily. So both of these effects are ridiculously strong and ridiculously easy to get. And just to put that into perspective, just so we have something to compare to make it easier to understand why that's so strong. The current race, or the previous race with the highest damage buff was Corvus. It had a passive 30% buff to magic and holy types. Okay. Cast Amplify, another 30% damage buff to most elements. Okay. That includes magic and holy, which ties into its passive. And it also had Arcane Ritual, which is another 40% damage buff, but it's RNG based, so you sort of have to gamble with its effect. It's not guaranteed, but it does also work on magic and holy, which is important because in total, Corvus has about 100% damage buff to magic and holy skills specifically, and then like a 70% damage buff to any other element. But it had 100% damage buff to magic and holy skills if your RNG was on your side. And what Boreas does here is it looks at that. It looks at that 100% damage buff, and it's like, that's pretty neat. That's cool. What if we doubled it? And that's what it did. And not only did they doubled it so that it has incredibly easy acquisition. All you have to do is use cold moves. You get 2 of them with Boreas alone. And then there's Ice Shards and Permafrost and Blizzard that you can also use for various other classes. But it's incredibly easy to build up. And it is twice as effective, and it is 100% reliable. Like that damage buff, once you use those skills, that damage buff is there. Of course, if you use a non-ice move, the buff will reduce, but that's sort of not that important if you're a nuker. If you rely on a single hit to deal damage, like, you're not losing anything. It's just a free 200% damage buff. And for the damage reduction, this is sort of the bit that I'm more interested in, because this is the one heavy quotes defense oriented thing that Boreas has going for it. But for the damage reduction, the previous race with the highest damage reduction was Inferion. Ignoring Bastion. Bastion sucks. I know Bastion's Spirit Awakening skill also technically gives it a 25% damage reduction, but it's temporary and also has high downsides. Inferion, on the other hand, it's just free. You just wait 25 turns and then bam, you're good. But the previous highest race, or the previous race with the highest damage reduction was Inferion, 25% damage reduction. And already, to me, 25%, that's pretty respectable. That is literally, I mean, that is a quarter of the damage you receive is just negated. So very, very strong. But Boreas is just, it just doesn't give a shit. I mean, it sees that 25%. It's like, oh, yeah, that's kind of cute, but I can do better. And then it almost triples it. It almost triples it. 70% damage reduction. I mean, that is literally 5% short of tripling Infurion's potency. This buff is incredibly, Boreas' buff is incredibly easy to build up. I feel like Dusky was sort of justifying the super strong effects by being, oh, there's really not that many skills, there's not that many ice skills, so you're gonna struggle to reach max stacks. No, no. Have you seen the cooldown on these skills? Like, Inner Frost is pretty long. It's like, what? Inner Frost is 12 turn cooldown, so that's pretty long. Chilling Winds is only 4. You can cast Chilling Winds, turn 1, and then assuming you have 2 energy, turn 2, whatever your build is, cast Inner Frost, and then at the end of Inner Frost, instantly cast Chilling Winds again. Right then, 3 moves, and you now have a 60% damage buff and a 30% damage reduction. What did you do? You casted. You spent 4 energy. You spent 4 energy and like a couple turns and 4 turns. Yeah, so Boreas doubles the damage buff of the previous highest nuke race, and it nearly triples the defense buff of the previous highest damage reduction race. Both of these effects are permanent. They have no exterior duration. As long as you keep using ice skills, they'll stay there. But I'm not going to shit on this without trying to offer a solution. So I have taken the liberty of modifying it, and my first change is going to be to the passive, the damage and damage reduction passive. I want Boreas to lean into its defense-oriented side, And so to start, I'm getting rid of the damage buff, just completely. It's gone. Because we have plenty of damage options. If you want a DPS race, I mean there are tons to choose from, man. I mean, Estella 25% damage buff. Nissi has a passive damage buff. It's not meta, of course, but it's there if you want it. Stultus, meta for any speed build. Veneri is very strong, just for the 20% damage buff, just passively. And Corvus, as you mentioned before, has that 100% buff if you're lucky. Dullahan is just strong overall, both of its skulls. Ghost Flame is very powerful, plus you get the extra stat points. Amorous, although no one uses Amorous, the fact that it can apply Hex on any class at any time, I still consider very powerful. And then there's Inferion. There's tons of damage of DPS race options, which is why I feel we don't need another one, especially on a race that's supposed to be defense oriented. Yeah, so we're getting rid of the damage buff, and then alongside that, we're reducing the damage reduction to 25%. And so you're probably thinking, whoa, holy shit, you just absolutely killed this race. I mean, the whole reason you use Boreas is for the 200% damage buff and the 70% damage reduction. Everything else is sort of just extra. And yes, that's the problem. The only reason you use the race is for the huge damage buff and huge damage reduction. No race should have both. You're either tanky or you deal a lot of damage. If you do both, where's the incentive to use anything else? So reduce the damage reduction to 25%, which keeps it in line with other options like Inferion. It just has a different way of reaching that cap. Same value, different mechanic to get there. The other passive, the one that allows it to apply cold on hits, which is basically just the Ice Rend weapon passive, barring the damage buff it has, that can stay. You know, that's useful for the Ice Rend and Frost gimmicks, but not ridiculously broken. So to summarize, new passives: when you use a cold elemental skill, buff your damage reduction by 5% to a cap of 25%, and hitting an enemy, this one didn't actually change, but hitting an enemy has a small chance to apply 2 cold status effects. Those are your passives. For the active skills, firstly, for Chilling Winds, drop the arcane/strength scaling for just endurance scaling. I mean, this is supposed to be a defense race, so giving it, you know, typical strength arcane scaling just makes people think, oh, why don't I just use this for DPS? You know, why don't I just use this for a strength arcane DPS build? You know, like literally every other race. We sort of want to push people away from that. So of course we nerf the scaling. Like it shouldn't be strength. It shouldn't be endurance divided by 60. We don't want Chilling Winds to be doing fucking like 4,000 damage. I mean, this is a defense race. You want this skill primarily for the status effects it applies, because those are handy for debuffing. But you also really just want it to have an option to help clear groups of enemies for like basic counter farming. Something that's sort of, it's nice to have. You can use it to get out of annoying encounters easily, but it's not gonna match anywhere near the damage of like Lightning Crash. And now for the biggest change, and that's to Inner Frost, because currently it's really boring. I mean, it's basically just Chilling Winds, but you stun yourself for 2 turns, which once again doesn't really lean into the defense race that the Boreas was supposed to be. So instead, the new effect would be, while you're heavy stunned, you apply the aggro status effect to all enemies in the opposing team. And then whenever you take damage for those 2 turns that you're heavy stunned, a matching damage amount gets stored. And then at the end of your heavy stun, that stored damage gets converted into an HP shield. So basically like a pure resonation shield, but it scales off the damage you take rather than your max HP. Just to clarify, the damage you take wouldn't be negated. You still take that damage. So if you have 100 health and you get hit for 50 damage, you will take 50 damage. You will be on 50 health. But then at the end of that turn, at the end of the heavy stun, that 50 damage that was stored then gets converted into a 50 HP shield for yourself for 3 turns or whatever. So you make yourself really vulnerable for 2 turns, and then you make yourself really durable for 2 turns. The goal here is really just to make something mechanically interesting that fits the purpose of the role of the race. It's supposed to be a defense race, right? So why not give it an interesting defense skill? And currently Inner Frost just doesn't do that. So, I mean, the point of my rework is it makes it defense orientated. And then also the aggro application helps tank builds. You know, for those 3 people out there that play Paladin, or the 1 person that plays Endurance Lancer, having another way to guarantee some aggro onto you so that your teammates aren't being hit as much is just very handy. The final issue I have with Boreas, it's the power creep. I mean, I'm sure you know what power creep is. If not, power creep is basically, it's where developers, they add new content, and that new content is slightly stronger, or in some cases a lot stronger, than old content, because developers want the player to have some sort of incentive to interact with the new content. And if the new content is worse than the old content, no one's going to use the new content. So they make the new content stronger than the old content. This isn't a new concept. Arcane Lineage did not invent this. But regardless, this is still an issue, and it is happening right now. I mean, Dusky's he's been pretty open about not having much experience with AL prior to his development on it. So I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. I'm not expecting him to make reasonable choices or decisions all the time about balancing, because he doesn't have a perfect hold on the game like, you know, the people who've been playing for 8 years, I exaggerate, have. But also, who is in his balance team then? Because either it doesn't exist yet, or the people in the balance team also have little experience or care for balancing. Or maybe they just don't have the final say, like the old balance team. Regardless of how well the members balanced, the final say was up to the testers for some reason and the developers. The developers, if they didn't like the balance changes, they vetoed it. They vetoed it without really giving much of a chance to fix their veto. So I wonder if maybe that's happening, assuming the team exists. Anybody in their right mind would realize that Boreas is just way too strong right now. Way, way too strong. I mean, it outperforms every other race in terms of damage. And it removes one of the biggest issues that glass cannon builds have, glass cannon DPS builds, that being their glass cannons. I mean, not anymore. With Boreas, now you're immortal. You're dealing even more damage than before, and you're immortal. So, very, very unbalanced. And this sort of concerns me. The fact that they're so comfortable with adding something like this concerns me, because if they add something as strong as Boreas to the game and they don't nerf it at some point, and people like that Boreas was added, yeah, that's fine. You can like it, but that doesn't change the fact that it is a bad direction for the game to go down. Because if Dusky sees people that are like, "Oh, Boreas is great. We want more stuff like Boreas," he's gonna say, "Okay, well, let me add more strong stuff like Boreas. People will like that." And then that'll just throw the whole balance of the game even more into the shitter. And we already have plenty of issues with balancing. I mean, half the classes are obsolete because they're outperformed by other classes. And then, the other half of the classes don't even work properly. So, I mean, we have enough issues with balancing. We don't need to add more power creep into this. So, that's it. Boreas sucks. Fucking hate Boreas. It's bad overall for game design.